Welcome to the first episode of Backroom Beats here in 2021. I am your host, Lamar Harris, aka DJ Noonie, hanging out with CJ Conrad, and I am excited that you guys are tuning in. 2020, we left it behind. Hopefully all the foolishness got left behind, but we are excited for the things that 2021 are going to bring. And I am excited to talk about our guest we have for the first episode of 2021. He is a jazz and electronic musician, composer, live remixer, producer, internationally known, and in my opinion, one of the best keyboardists, pianists, and arrangers of our time. I am talking about the legendary Mark de Clive-Lowe. What's going on, man?
Thank you for that beautiful introduction. I'm blushing. How are you?
So, how you been, man?
I've been surviving. We're like you just mentioned, we're entering year 2 of COVID, and it's been a really interesting experience. I mean, that's a whole conversation itself, isn't it? How have you been?
Right.
I mean, I spent 20 years on the road, like nonstop.
Wow.
And so the last, since March has been the longest I've been in one place since 1999.
Wow. I mean,
it's kind of been a trip.
It's a whole nother different feeling being at home versus like always just on the go,
Yeah. And I've really found a lot of value in it. And it's taught me a lot about, my kind of personal growth and humanity. And I think there's a reason why some musicians choose to never get off the road.
True.
It's like, Freud would have a field day. It's like, so what are you all running away from? So yeah, it's been really healthy for me actually. And also physically, like I travel with a lot of equipment. I'm often traveling solo. So I'm carrying like almost 200 pounds of equipment around by myself, different country every night. And that's just physically taxing. Yeah. So it's been nice to not do that.
Yeah. But you've still been creating a lot of good stuff, man. I've been, keeping up with you online, and you've just been putting out a lot of great content. What's been some of the inspiration that you've been using during this time to just keep creating? Because I know some artists have just been kind of like I wouldn't say it's a funk, but they've just been running against like, when you factor in life and all the other stuff, it sometimes just gets hard to create. And especially if you got young ones running around the house or all the other stuff, what are you doing to just, just get past all of that to be able to keep creating?
I mean, I think a big part of it is obviously out of necessity, don't work, don't eat kind of thing. But for me, when the lockdown started, I think it was March the 12th. I was driving up to San Fran from LA. I was supposed to play at SF Jazz that night with my friend Haley Nicewanger, her band Mason. So we're about an hour out of San Fran, and we listening to the radio, and Gavin Newsom, the governor, was talking about no gatherings over 50 people and all that kind of thing. So we're like, we just drove 5 hours and now the gig's canceled. And then, of course, like every musician over the next few hours, every gig got canceled, right?
Right.
So for me, I actually made a decision, I kind of decided that touring is not coming back at that point. Like I wasn't thinking, stuff will be cool by June. I was like, it's over. Touring is literally over. And so that made me really kind of take stock of everything I do, and where is my value, and what do I really enjoy, and what do I want to do, and if touring's never coming back, what does that look like? So for me, there was quite a lot of peace in that, in a way. Like, I mean, I had an Asia tour the next month, obviously gone. South Africa after that, gone. Europe after that, gone. It was no small thing. But the main thing, which really kind of, to speak to your question directly, which really kept me going with the creating last year, was actually launching my Patreon.
Oh, wow.
And it's funny, I was saying to someone the other day how it's funny how like everyone knows what an OnlyFans is and how it works, but no one knows what a Patreon is. You still got to explain that.
Right.
And so for the listeners, it's the same thing. It's like a subscription membership site. OnlyFans obviously got the cosign from the sex industry, which really helped it blow up. But yeah, I'd wanted to do a Patreon for years, but I always felt like, if I have monthly subscribers and I'm always touring, how can I deliver content to them? And so figuring, well, I'm not going anywhere, now's the time to start. So I started that quite early in the pandemic. And what was really cool was the sense of community that I found through Patreon. Like it was actually a deeper sense of community than I've had with fans any time in my life. And that's quite a statement, having been, releasing and touring for 2 decades. So it was just a really affirming and positive, felt like a very positive action. We'd do things like each month I'd invite everyone to come along and we'd jump on a Zoom and bring like a piece of music that they were inspired by. So we'd listen to the music together and talk about it.
Oh, cool.
And that's like it's a really simple action. And I imagine for you and me both, like we're old enough to remember a time when, your boy would get a new album and be like, yo, I got this record, come around, and you listen to it together, right?
Right.
Which is a whole different culture to now, where it's like, hey, the new Knowledge record dropped. Have you checked it out? It's like, oh, I'll check it out. So we're all individually listening on our phone or whatever.
Right.
So just that kind of collective community, which is totally indebted to technology, obviously, but that really kept me going this year. And then I'd have to create. I promised everyone a new exclusive production each month. So there's a necessity for me to create. So each month there's a new joint. So 8 months in, there's now 8 joints. It's almost a whole album that only exists on Patreon.
Wow.
So stuff like that. And, I found that was really, really great for me. And then I was also very fortunate. I was working on a project right before the pandemic that, with an organization, a nonprofit in Richmond, Virginia. And the plan was they were going to take me to Hiroshima, to Japan, and I was going to spend time with atomic bomb survivors, hearing their stories, and then create music out of that, like inspired by their stories. So then the pandemic hits, and obviously that couldn't happen. And this organization, bless them, they were able to pivot on a dime. And they're like, okay, we can't do that, so we're going to do a virtual festival. So it's called La Sabre Festival. And they had me as the artist in residence. I was helping curate. I was doing live streams for them. Each month, each featured artist, I'd do a live remix set of the featured artist. And so there's a whole lot of work there, which, it had a budget, which is great. It was monthly for the first 4 or 5 months of the pandemic, which kept me focused. And then not least of all, actually having a budget meant I had the resources to get my live streaming game together. Like, we were just chatting before we started the podcast. Like, I think you know what I mean. Like, I went and got the video switcher and the cameras and the, worked it all out, right? Because I've always been an avid technology adoptee. I remember in 1998 or 9, around then, I was in London, and I was collaborating a lot with my friends Bugs in the Attic. And I remember walking into the studio with my laptop and a little PCMCIA or some kind of card which goes in the laptop,
right,
which breaks out into XLRs, right? And so I was doing music on my laptop, and this is like before 2000. And so all the producers, all the Bugs crew, they were like, "Oh my God, you see, Mark came in and he's making music on his laptop," and so I've always felt like technology has been something to jump on, as quick as possible. So I think, this last year has really given a lot of opportunity in that world, in that realm too.
That's true. I think in '98, I think I still had a Motorola phone.
Hey,
the gray
it
one.
worked though, right? It worked.
And a pager, man. Like even like I said, some of the stuff that I've been seeing you do online. I remember, I think it was back in. It was a game that was on, and you just created this like freestyle set to like the Lakers playing. Yeah. Like that's crazy. It was that was funny because I love my basketball, and
I mean, I grew up in the era of, Jordan and Magic and Bird. And for me, growing up in New Zealand, that was all about the Bulls. I mean, there was just no question who was who. But then when I moved to LA, it was like peak Lakers, three-peat Kobe. And so, I was like, well, I live in LA. It's all about the Lakers. So right. Obviously LeBron coming was a big deal. And then, the last season, I think that might have even been playoffs time. And I'd scheduled a live stream unknowingly to me at the same time as the game. I was like, oh, wait, what am I going to do? And so I was like, well, why not? Why not put the game on and just vibe out and, make beats and play music to it and just interpret those moments in the way that I feel it, kind of thing. And I mean, the NBA took that off YouTube about 10 seconds later, but the people who caught the live stream they got the whole thing. Yeah. But yeah, I did the whole first half, I think. So that was a lot of fun. But I love that, just taking inspiration from unexpected things. I feel like music is so broad and so diverse, and there's so much possibility. Where I mean, music's in nature before man even picks up an instrument. It's in the wind, it's in the trees, it's in the water, it's everywhere, and obviously in the animals. And so the idea for me of taking visual inspiration and creating from that, I find it really liberating and freeing. Like, no two people will do that the same, right? Like if you're going to put on a ball game and improvise to it, it's going to be completely different to what I would do the same game. Right. And that's the beauty of it.
And you've always been, man, like seem to be pushing the bounds. Like you would do stuff where it's just a viola, a harp, and a flute player, or do something with like a whole obscure type ensemble with somebody painting alongside of it. And I remember the first time I ever saw you in St. Louis at Lola, I was like, man, this guy has a lot of stuff in this bag. It's like every time we kept looking around, you were breaking out more stuff. Like, I know he got a MIDI control in that bag. Yeah, he does got a MIDI control in that bag. Like, man.
or three.
Right. Like how do you even like get into like the mindset of even like getting the gear to like flow with the video and just creating like the experience that people can experience, like just with all the technology and stuff like that, but still just keep it organic like that,
I mean, I guess it has a lot to do with, the music I grew up loving and what attracts me to that music specifically. So I grew up in New Zealand, and piano was my first instrument. My dad kind of forced me onto that at 4 years old. Like I didn't know any better, and I was scared of him, so I did what I was told, kind of thing. And he was super into big band jazz, like 1930s stuff. My older brother was into like kind of early bop, kind of 1950s bop. So there was jazz around me for sure, and I heard that, and it was always around. And then I remember I'd go to the music stores after school and just hang out and just play with keyboards and like, not knowing what I was doing, just like it seemed fun. And it got to a point where I thought, okay, I'm gonna buy some of this stuff. So I got a keyboard and a drum machine and a sequencer. Like really, this was like 88 maybe. And I didn't know what I was doing. I was just kind of like making noise with it. And I remember I went to school one day, and my friend at school, like, most of my peers were listening to, pop and indie rock, a lot of guitar music. And to be honest, none of it resonated with me, and I didn't know why. And then my friend walks up to me before school. He had his Walkman headphones, and he puts his headphones on me, and it was the first Guy album. So I'm hearing Teddy's Jam for the first time. Just losing my shit completely. And I didn't know why, right? And in hindsight, I know why. And it was because it was, it's keyboard-based music, so I could relate to it without even knowing I was relating to it. It was black music, so harmonically and rhythmically, it's coming from a whole different perspective. And And that just really spoke to me. So suddenly I was like, oh my God, I want to be Teddy Riley. And then it was like, Native Tongues hip hop, and it was like, Velvet DeVoe happened, and Rex and Effect and all this kind of stuff. And so between like, Digital Underground, Brand Nubian, and Guy, I was in heaven.
Wow.
And I started just making a whole lot of loops, and I didn't know what I was doing, but I started working with rappers and singers in New Zealand. And then one day, I woke up one day, and I was like, all these loops and I still bullshit. So I sold my equipment. I sold all my vinyl. I had records I haven't seen to this day, like gone. And it was just, the piano, me, and a Miles record and a Coltrane record and an Ahmad Jamal record. And again, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't have mentors. I didn't have teachers. I just knew that that's where my heart was pulling me. Around that time, Mo Better Blues came out. I went to see Mo Better. I'd love Do the Right Thing. And then, so I was like, Spike Lee movie, jazz, cool. And I went to that. And man, because I hadn't heard contemporary jazz. So hearing Branford and Terence Blanchard, and mostly to the point Kenny Kirkland, like hearing all those musicians, not knowing who they were, but hearing that music, I was like, this is it. It was so hip. It looked so hip. And the lifestyle portrayal was quite inviting, and the music was ridiculous. So I went out the next day, bought the soundtrack. Branford had just dropped a record called Crazy People Music. So I bought that the same day. To this day, one of my favorite jazz records ever. And so that just kind of set me on this path where I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this. One day I'm gonna move to New York. I'm gonna play with Art Blakey and Betty Carter, and I'm gonna do all this stuff. And the funny thing was, like a few years later, like I like to say, kind of metaphorically speaking, I tripped over a drum machine on my way to the dance floor. And that's pretty much what happened. Like, I was around a lot of nightlife where there were a lot of DJs, there were jam bands, it was peak acid jazz. And so I'd do all these jazz gigs in my hometown in Auckland. And then once a month we'd do a jam gig at this club, which was a DJ club. And so there'd be like 2 drummers, rappers, turntablists, all sorts of stuff. We're just improvising. And so like I realized how much fun that was for me. And like, I was actually doing a jazz gig. I was at the Auckland Town Hall on stage, middle of a gig, grand piano, in a suit, thinking, man, I just have so much more fun playing that other gig. Like, what am I doing? So if only I was serious about the fun gig instead of so serious about the serious gig. Right. So that became quite a turning point for me. And then 1998, I spent the year traveling around the world and connected with a lot of people who became my friends and peers in London, the Bugs in the Attic crew, IG Culture, Full Hero, Phil Asher, rest his soul. Went to New York, connected with Joe Clausel, Francois K, DJ Spinner, and just kind of went around the world finding this music that was like everything I've ever loved in music put together in a way I could never have imagined possible. Wow. And so that really... Well, and also hearing that, I could hear how I could contribute. It's kind of like when I first heard jungle or drum and bass. Like I loved it, but there's so much space in it. I could hear like, wait, I hear the space for me. I hear how I can, insert myself and be part of this. So that was kind of part of the motivation. But all that to say, like, it's been this lifelong kind of back and forth between jazz and beat music, basically. Before electronic music, I wasn't even thinking that, the Jungle Brothers are electronic music. Right. So samples and beats, and having that back and forth, and not being a b-boy in the sense of like I wasn't a rapper, I wasn't DJing, I wasn't a dancer, I wasn't doing graph. It was like, how do I relate to all this music? Well, I'm a piano player, so obviously it was through the actual music. And, I get the same chills and goosebumps from like, listening to, Miles and Herbie and Wayne as I do listening to like Tip and Fife and Jerobi. It's like, it's the same thing to me. So right. If I'm going to be in playing in a form, so say it's hip hop or it's house music, that kind of organicness that I love in like Miles or Net or some 70s Keith Jarrett or whatever it might be, that's going to be part of the picture. And I couldn't like write a how to, this is how you do it, so much as I feel like I've been fortunate to find a way to express myself given everything I love and putting it all together. Does that make any sense? I don't know.
Oh, man.
I'm really glad you broke it down the way you did, saying all the references and whatnot, because it all makes sense now. What I'm thinking to myself now is about the first time I heard your music was the Verve remix compilation, the Shirley Horn Return to Paradise. I just remember thinking it was so sophisticated, but it grooved, you know what I mean?
Right.
And even more so when I finally heard Shirley Horn's original version, I was like, oh, this is completely different.
But isn't that beautiful, that original?
Yes.
It is gorgeous. But it's like, what you did with it was so like loungy, and it I haven't heard anything like it since. And I knew after I heard that I would have to find the rest of your music.
Oh, wow, man. Thank you.
Yeah.
I have two things to say about that remix. One is that Shirley Horn hated it.
Really?
Wow.
Her grandkids thought it was the dopest thing she ever did. But she before she passed away, there was an NPR special, and the NPR DJ was, it was just him and Shirley going through her catalog, and he's like, well, saying to Shirley, here's something that you may not have even heard, I don't know. And so he plays my remix, and of course, I chopped her voice, right? It's not, I totally reconfigured it. So as soon as the voice comes in, she's like, oh, no, stop that, no, stop that, no.
And that actually makes sense, knowing what I know about Shirley Horn, because she likes to lay back in the groove.
Of course.
And the way it was like a complete...
It's a whole different thing, right? And then the other aspect with that remix, which was interesting, was... So I not long before that put up my album 6 Degrees on Universal Jazz. So Universal on Verve, so it's all kind of part of the same parcel. So when the New York office was doing Verve Remix, they reached out to me, I think primarily because I was a Universal UK artist. So it's kind of, the in-house thing. And so I was kind of working on the remix, and I spoke to the A&R, because they were checking in with me, like, how's it going? And I'm like, oh, it's cool, how's it? And I asked them, how's the project going? Like, oh, it's great. We've got Masters at Work and Jazzy Jeff and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. I was like, oh, I just had a meltdown. I threw out everything I'd done and started again.
Oh, wow.
Just with that knowledge of like, man, my heroes are doing this record. And so I'm glad I did, because it worked out great. And then that track actually became the blueprint, the production blueprint for what I would go on to do for the Tides Are Rising album. That was a clear move from the 6 Degrees production into a new kind of level of production for me.
Yeah, and one thing I think is so really dope about what you do is that there is very much a production aspect with you and vocalists that just it just melds together perfectly. But then you also have this totally instrumental side to you that is almost unrelated. You know what I mean?
Even when you MD.
That's been part of my branding challenge through my career. Like, people are like, well, so what do you do? It's like, well, I like house music and I like free jazz. So, and it's funny how jazz has, in the last maybe 5 years, really come into that conversation around electronic music and hybridity. And, not to sound like the old dude, but I did feel like, wait, we were doing this 20 years ago kind of thing. But yeah, there's something about, for me, there was always something about electronic music and dance music and club music where I wanted to work out, like the best analogy I can give you is like a kid eating dinner and you want them to eat their vegetables. So you might give them a burger, but you're going to pack that burger full of salad too, right? You got to trick them. Right. And so I always felt like that. It's like there were moments in time, there were gigs I've done where it's a packed dance floor, and I know that if you took the beats away, this is basically free jazz. You know, so I was like, yeah, we got these people dancing to this stuff, or really quite twisted harmony. It's like they don't even know, but we've got them in the groove to this. We got them right in the pocket to something they wouldn't even check for. So kind of, and I mean, I don't know if I was underestimating the audience, but that was always an intention to find the subversive way in to bring one world into the other. And then it happened like when I moved to LA, like I've been here 12 years now, and my 10 years in London, I literally didn't play the acoustic piano. Like I was a complete Judas to jazz. My drummer in my band, who's a killing jazz drummer too, he was like, man, let's go play a trio gig just for fun. Like, no, man, let's not. Or some producer would be like, yeah, let's put some piano on this track. It's like, no, let's just pull up the Juno, you know? Kind of, I was really quite consciously rejecting it and trying to deconstruct the musician that I felt like I'd grown up as. And also I was in a scene in the broken beat community where, you know, things could be jazzy, but not too jazzy. There was like a limit, which is where that subversiveness really comes in. But then I moved to LA in late 2008, and circumstances and people in my life led me to reconnect with the piano. And so it was actually my ex-wife, Nia Andrews, who's a fantastic artist, singer-songwriter. She was doing her debut show, and we just started hanging out, and she was like, I want you to play piano on my gig. I was like, cool, I'll bring my Rhodes. It's like, no. I said, I want you to play piano on my gig. So the spot had a little baby grand, and I honestly hadn't played piano forever. And then a lot of people came out with that show, and you know, they came out to support her and see what she was doing. And then there were also the heads out there who knew my music, but they knew, like, you know, the Tides Are Rising album and the remixes. And they're like, wait, what's he doing at the piano? Like, a lot of people didn't even know I grew up playing piano. And so that was a really special reconnection for me, where it was like, you know, hanging out with an old friend again and just realizing, oh yeah, I do love this. And then a lot of things in LA kind of brought me back into jazz in a big way. Like, there's a singer here named Dwight Tribble who came through Ferry Sanders' band. And I started playing in his group. And I started playing in an Ethiopian jazz group playing Mulatu Atstake's music. So there were always opportunities to really explore the piano again and explore sounds I've had in my head, which, like everything I love about, say, Miles's quintet live at the Plug Nickel, like that kind of freedom and depth of exploration, I couldn't do that in a club setting. Right. Like, I could allude to some of the aspects, but you can't do it when you're on the grid with electronics. Mm-hmm. So, as just that as an example, to be able to actually take inspiration from those kinds of feelings and memories and music I love, and to be able to explore that through the piano again was amazing. So it's almost like the UK decade was, you know, really my formative production time, and then the last decade plus in LA has been my kind of reconnecting the holistic picture of the whole story of, you know, what I grew up doing and loving, from jazz to hip hop to jungle to house, and then able to bring it into one picture again. It's been, you know, it feels like a real blessing to be able to do that.
Wow. I know recently one of the places that you frequently used to record at and play at, the Blue Whale just closed.
Man.
It seems to be happening all around the country more and more.
Yeah.
Where do you see the scene kind of going, like in general? Like, as places kind of start disappearing more and more, like, to be able for artists to come out and just do their originals and express their ideas. How do you think that landscape's going to look in the next couple of years?
I think I sound like a pessimist with this kind of thing, and I think most of the conversation is around optimism. I think there's a really healthy balance that needs to be struck between optimism and pessimism. Just speaking to the Blue Whale, I mean, it's such a loss. I mean, I've been fortunate to play, literally all over the world, and there is not a single club anywhere that functions in the way that place functioned.
Wow.
There was a way that, like some venues, when you're playing in the room, you kind of have to really assert yourself against the vibe of the room to create the vibe you want.
Right.
And then other venues, the room is inviting to whatever vibe you want to create and becomes part of the vibe. It's actually a lot easier in those rooms to perform, generally speaking. So the Blue Whale was like that. The Blue Whale was like a member of the band on stage with you. Like I went in there, and actually the live of the Blue Whale EP I put out, the first track on that Evergreen was literally just a scrap of paper with a couple of chords on it. And I just felt so underprepared. But obviously the musicians playing with me had a big part to do with this as well. But the room, that taught me, wow, I can bring in anything into this room, and the room will be part of, it's almost ceremonial. The room's part of the process and the creativity. And so losing that space is, I mean, it's tragic. There's literally nowhere like it. There's nowhere else in LA, that's for sure, to play music specifically in the way you could in that room. And like you said, it's going to happen a lot more. Like I saw there was I don't know if it's the Save Our Stages thing or something. They got there's some money from Congress. But I mean, I don't see that filtering down to the DIY club, which is run by the person who just loves music and isn't doing it to be a millionaire. I see Live Nation getting a lot of money when they don't need it.
Don't get us started, Mark. Don't get us started.
I mean, you started it. So
I did.
And I mean, I don't think it bodes well. I think that, I mean, I've been hearing conversations around this kind of thing a lot on Clubhouse recently, and a lot of people on there seem to be talking from the mainstream model. And so when it comes to touring and venues, they're talking about Live Nation and AEG, and that's like those are basically the outliers as I see it in cultural terms. It's the independent artists, independent musicians, independent venues, independent promoters. Those are the people that move the needle and push the dial and change culture. And the ripple effect eventually reaches the mainstream in some form. I feel like, Missy and Timbaland are great examples of that. Had you not had jungle and drum and bass happen in the UK, then we wouldn't have Missy and Timbaland in the same form we have them. And that's undisputable. So there's a nature of independent creativity that is the lifeblood of culture. So that, I do worry about that, because these venues, like, you might go to some of these venues on a Friday or Saturday, like 2 years ago, and it'd be packed. And you're like, oh, they're doing great. But you go on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, and there's more people on the bandstand than there are in the audience.
Yep.
When the spot's packed out, that venue is breaking even. They're paying off their losses, right? So you're talking about venues that are break even at best, who are doing it for the love, for the culture. They're not going to come back. Like, why would you come back as a venue owner? Like, I've been busting my balls the whole time without a pandemic, and now you want me to come back, and then the landlord's still asking for 8 months rent, right?
Right.
So you have that aspect. And then you have the idea that there'll be more musicians than before who want to play. There'll be more musicians who will play for less. Venues will want to pay less. Promoters will want to pay less. I see one positive. The one positive I see is that I think pandemic and immediate post-pandemic, traveling is still not going to be that doable. So I think local scenes have a lot to gain from this. You can't bring in bands and artists from out of town or out of the country, so it's got to be local.
Right.
And that's cool. But then it comes down to, well, where are they going to play? And I've seen people here in LA, like my friend Lena Fournier, really amazing beat maker, producer. She's been doing a monthly event in Lamar Park outside. And people are just loving that, because she's got a sampler drum machine and some musicians, and it's a vibe. But it's not a revenue stream.
Right.
You know, it makes people happy, love it. Musicians get to play, love that too. It provides culture, I love that. But there has to be business, because otherwise these people are not going to be able to keep playing.
True. Well, it's,
so I don't know, man.
it's going to come to a point where artists are going to have to make a decision where it's like, you know, you can't rely on the venue all the time. We've got to eventually buy the venue or create the places of ourselves and take some of the power away from some of these bigger entities. And, you know, it's going to be a struggle, and a lot of people are not going to want to put in that type of work to do that. But, you know, it's going to come a time where, you know, you're going to be battling so hard, you're going to not have no choice, because if they sit there and drive the price down to a point where, you know, let's say everybody was getting 1,000 a gig, now all of a sudden you're getting 200 a gig or 150 a gig, you know, you've got everybody and their mama battling for that one little piece. So if you get together and we put our money together, you know, 10 here, 10 here, you know, let's just buy the building and do what we want to do. It's a little work, but, you know, I mean, at that point in time, we have a little bit more control over the artistry that's going on. So, you know, something.
Yeah, I agree that there'll be new ecosystems for sure, and I am excited about that. I feel like when it comes to independent music industry, we weren't finished yet. When it comes to the mainstream music industry, we were done. Yeah. So I was happy to see. I mean, happy is a bit of a funny word to use, but I wasn't upset to see things get disrupted for the not only the mainstream music industry, but, you know, consumerism at large and capitalism at large, and, you know, capitalism is the flip side of racism. So that everything was shifting, right? Yeah. And so that's all positive. That's all great. You know, how the independent feeds his family, I don't know. That's a whole other question, right?
True.
I mean, I feel like for me, when it comes to touring, like that's literally all I would do. I barely ever unpack. You know, relationships suffered, family suffered. You know, I was just about the road, and I'm completely sure now that I don't want to return to that lifestyle. I don't want to be playing, you know, like my last Japan tour, I did 9 shows in 7 cities in 8 days. Wow. And it's ridiculous. And it wasn't because they all, you know, paid blue chip. It was because I love Japan, I love playing, and that's what I do. But it's not sustainable, you know? And so I'm realizing for myself in some kind of post-COVID world that it can't just be about touring. Like, touring has to be, you know, projects I really want to do where the business is straight, where it's somewhere I want to be, and I can afford to bring a roadie tech who carries all my stuff. And I mean, that's real. That's, I mean, you know, I'm not the young man I was 20 years ago.
Feel you on that.
And then I do think that, you know, especially in Europe, it was totally normal for us to play a different country every night. You know, countries are 1 hour flight away. It's not difficult, right? So it's kind of like playing a different state every night in America. I think that model is pretty much over, and I do think there'll be more situations like kind of deeper work, like say the artist comes into a community for a few weeks and, you know, does workshops and masterclasses and connects with local community, makes music with them, does a concert, but it's deeper work. You know, I think the kind of in and out every night kind of thing, I don't see how it's logistically possible until the world is fully herd immunity done. And I don't see the value in it anymore. Like I think the value for me, especially at this point in my life, is about the deep work. Like, what can I contribute to community and to people beyond this, you know, 1 hour on stage?
True. Man, you know, I would say, like I said, with the work that you've been putting out, man, you know, I don't want to butcher. I know, like the "We See You, We Hear You" with the James Baldwin samples. I was definitely digging that. You know,
man, I was crying. Like, I had tears, man. There was something about I mean, at that point, at the peak of summer last year, the question of, I guess, creative allyship. What can I contribute to a conversation that is so incendiary, volatile, but top of mind right now? And without, especially as a non-American, I'm an adopted Angelino. Like 12 years is it, but I grew up on the other side of the world, pretty much as a third culture kid between Japanese and New Zealand culture. But there was a sense for me growing up of very distinct otherness. There were no other half Japanese people around me or half Asians around me. So there was always a question of how do I fit in? And in Japan at that time, there weren't many half Japanese kids. So I was like, how do I fit in here? So there was always these questions for me in societally around that kind of idea, which I think is probably for me the kind of the entry point in relatability. Not saying they're one and the same, obviously, but just having a perspective of what otherness is and what discrimination is, and then understanding the American history and just how necessary change is. So all that shit happening last summer was obviously much needed. And then for me, when I was asked to do that set for Los Sabre Festival, the organizer hit me up and she actually brought to me this term, well, it's a greeting from South Africa, Sawubona. And Sawubona, means we see you, we are here. And there's so much in that nuance inside those words, which I know that it was a really prevalent greeting at the peak of apartheid as well. And so reflecting on that, she asked me to put a set together. And, Baldwin's words they're so powerful and so timeless and so necessary. And they also show how nothing's changed.
Yes.
So to be able to contextualize those within my own art without trying to, over-insert myself. I wanted his words to be what it's about. It wasn't about, hey, I used some James Baldwin, isn't that cool? That wasn't the point at all. And so, I found a bit of video I wanted to use, and it was really interesting doing that set because, I'm on headphones, so the sound is like in my head, and, hearing his voice and his words, giving a bit of ambience with a bit of delay and reverb. So it's just kind of sitting there and improvising some piano to it without wanting to over-insert myself on him. There was something kind of, for me personally, something emotionally resonant in that moment that just, I don't often get chills from myself while I'm doing something. And so that was a moment where I could feel, the energy that was encoded in the music. And for me, that's the whole mission. It's like, how can I capture humanity and reflect humanity and my own humanity through my art? That's the bottom line, really.
That's true. And you definitely have, like I said, with your work, you definitely are creating a whole nother different sound and giving a whole nother voice inside of the way that you incorporate all that stuff. And not a lot of people are able to do that. Even just watching you from a musician standpoint, watching you MD stuff, everybody is not able to sit there and control a band and control a unit. You have a very unique way of controlling the unit, which is pretty cool. So, I mean,
that might be a testament to how much of a control freak I am. So I don't know if that's a good thing. But I mean, there've been some pretty comical moments too when, because I'm centering the electronics and kind of live production in the gig. So I have, the drum machine and effects and keyboards and maybe synth bass and, there's a lot of control there. So I remember times when in London specifically, actually, when I remember a kid got up, an MC, he thought it was a jam session and it wasn't. And And so I used my tools to run him off the stage. You know, that sounds a little callous, but he shouldn't have been on the stage.
Facts.
And I could have, I have actually just pressed stop before. And so, you know, the band was to be playing for half a bar, but it's kind of like a record stopping. But this one, I just ran the tempo up. Like we were like 80, and I just slowly ran it up till we got to about 200, and it just sounded like some crazy, frenetic. This kid was gone.
He don't have any more bars. No bars.
But I mean, having said that, I do welcome collaboration.
Invited collaboration.
Yeah, I like collaboration is where all of the magic happens. I think in creativity, all of it.
True. And you've had some pretty good collabs with a lot of different people, from Cy Smith all the way down to, you know, to a bunch of folks. I gotta ask, because just with the news of us learning that MF Doom passed, man, you know, man. I'm like, you know, I still quietly don't have any words for that. Like, you know, you talking about somebody that's got their own individual sound and stuff like God. That, you know?
Yeah. I mean, he could have never picked up a microphone and been one of the greatest producers of all time. He could have never picked up a drum machine and been one of the greatest MCs of all time. You know, it's like, just so the contribution is amazing. And I guess if anything, I'm grateful we have his art, his creations forever.
Yeah.
You know, to think that there are probably people out there who may be talented in their own ways to that level, who we don't get to hear their art or see their art. True. Or have it. So that's something. I got to meet him one time very briefly when I came to LA, when the do-over was still this tiny little thing. But yeah, I wish I'd had a chance to have more experience with him. Just, you know, and listening to some interviews now and friends who knew him, their recollections, just sounds like a great human being too, you know?
Right.
And that's the bottom line, right?
True.
But yeah, what a loss. Well, we got to value people while they're here, right?
That's true. It's true. Is there anybody that you would want to definitely collaborate with this year or in the next couple of years that, you know, that's just like on your bucket list of people like, I just got to get at least one in, at least one?
I think so. I've been lucky in that most of my bucket list I've been able to tick off, which is kind of insane to me. But I would love to create something with Herbie. You know, he's just provided an entire lifetime of inspiration, and I just feel like we could do some really interesting shit together. Tip has been a long time bucket list. And then, I mean, it's, you know, more than the names. I feel like there's so much talent out there. Just, I'm not, Kim Burrell. I would love to do something with Kim Burrell.
Wow. I didn't see that coming.
Nope.
Kim Burrell has a song called Seeing Over that I don't know if you're familiar with, but if not, please check it sometime. Like, I heard that joint. Oh my God, life-changing. I mean, you know, if I'm talking about vocalists, there's an infinite number of vocalists to collaborate, right?
Right.
I mean, Layla would be on the list for sure.
Ooh.
And then I'm sure plenty of people I've never heard of and never met who are just equally incredible.
I would put you in the room with Jacob Collier, James Poyser, and see what happened. Just the three of you all.
Too many notes, bro. Too many notes.
That's almost like 1,000 keyboards like laying around.
I mean, we had not a Jacob experience, but when I went to Jazzy Jeff's playlist retreat, maybe might have been the second year, or I forget. But I remember when we went in the studio the first time, it was crazy. It was like Poyser, Musina, Daniel Crawford,
wow,
Stroh, someone else, myself, and like, I mean, it was a lot, and just people jumping on and off the keyboards, and it was kids in a candy store kind of thing. And I remember we were calling Jazzy Jeff. It was kind of like what was it? Was it Jafessa X? Something like that. It was along lines of the X-Men. It was like, this is the X-Men school for the gifted. Like,
Oh wow.
and Jazzy Jeff is Professor Xavier, you know, Jafessa X.
Wow.
But yeah, I mean, the whole world of collaboration for me has been everything. I mean, you know, musicians who I grew up listening to that I would never have dreamed I would get to work with, you know, Harvey Mason, Pino Palladino, like lots of great jazz musicians, and then, you know, there's a joint on one of my records, an album called Renegades, a song called Get Started, and that was my first collaboration, or maybe second, with Omar, singer from the UK. Yeah. But obviously, you know, we don't really have liner notes now, so we don't know who's on the track. But it's like Omar, Sheila E's on percussion, Pino Palladino's on bass, Lil John Roberts is on drums. And it's like, well, what more of a band could I want? You know, like, so I feel like life has been a bucket list in action. And, you know, I have immense gratitude around that. And just to the point now where I'm just curious about collaborating where it doesn't have to be someone who I've heard of before. I know that such amazing things can come from it and such unexpected things. So. Yeah,
Let me ask you this. It seems like the people that you do collaborate with have a very unique sound or style about them. Is there anything that you're looking for, or is it just what happens?
No, I think that's really astute. There is something I'm always looking for, or maybe there's things I'm particularly looking to not have.
Okay.
Like sometimes it's easier to see what I don't want than to see what I do want. But drummers are interesting, actually. So I've been fortunate to play with almost every drummer I could possibly want to play with. And percussionists are similar, actually. And I've had a lot of percussionists I've got to work with. But drummers, there's a thing where, like I often will say to a drummer I don't know, you know, it's like the beats, you know, the MPC or the machine or whatever, the beats are that's the drums. That's the sample, but you're like the live break inside the sample. And if you don't understand what I'm saying, then I can't really help you, right? And now taking that a step further, it might be a drummer who doesn't understand what I'm saying, but just has a stylistic leaning which fits in a really interesting way. Love that. I've had a few times where it's a killing drummer, and he's a church drummer. And so I didn't grow up playing at a church because I grew up in New Zealand. And so I'm definitely not disparaging that in any way. But there was kind of a thing I noticed where if it was a hardcore church drummer, he'd treat the beats like a metronome and start practicing all over it.
Yeah, that's about right.
And
I see it now. Uh-huh.
So yeah, with the drummer, there's a very specific type. And then beyond that, I just think it's about musicians who are really open-minded. Like I don't work well with closed-minded musicians. You know, if a cat's like, you know, if I'm in a setting which is presenting my music as jazz, and a certain cat's like, that's not jazz, well, we're probably not going to be able to vibe together very well. Or if I'm doing a set in at a house music party, and some DJ's like, man, that's not house music. It's like, well, we're not going to vibe together. Like, that's not the point. So I think it does come down to open-mindedness. And then, I mean, obviously ability. Like, you know, I like playing with people who can play. And then horn players, similar to drummers that I mentioned before. I played with some horn players who treat what's happening like a metronome, and they're just running shit all over it.
Right.
And that's not what it is. You know, we're creating, you know, we're basically painting watercolors even if it sounds like we're dropping bombs, like, the idea is we're painting watercolors. So can you come in and paint with us or not? Like there's no lines to paint inside of. So if you need the lines, you might want to play with someone else.
That's real. That's real. Man, we appreciate you taking time out your schedule. Definitely. Being on our first episode of 2021. Where can our listeners find you at and catch up with you?
Absolutely, man. I appreciate being here and chatting with you all, and that you have questions which are things that we all care about. I appreciate that a lot. So yeah, I'm very easy to find depending where you like to be. Facebook, MDCL Music. It's my initials, MDCL. Twitter, MDCL. Instagram is my full name, Mark de Clive-Lowe. The website is easy, mdcl.tv. And for those who want to come aboard and get the full experience, the Patreon is kind of crazy. I mean, I mentioned it later. I'm going to plug it right now. We do everything. I create a monthly exclusive track for the members. We do monthly Zoom sessions where we hang out. I do monthly in-studio Zooms where I'm in studio creating and really breaking down process. There's exclusive vinyl. The last one I did, there's 6 copies in the world, and they're only on Patreon. So, stuff like that. I'm trying to make that a really special environment. So if that sounds interesting, people can find that at patreon.com/MDCL.
Man, get the Patreon and comp all the records.
It's funny because it's like I literally made 6 of these records, and I realized, wait, I'm not going to have one.
Got to keep one, at least one, maybe one.
Maybe we'll see.
Well, cool. Well, we thank you again for sharing these gems and these stories and this knowledge with us, Mark. And hopefully we'll get a chance to see you sometime this year. If we get back to traveling. If not, I might just be in LA, just riding down with a gimbal on a skateboard, like I'm just in there just filming in the background.
Hey, that can get you a lot of views, You'd be surprised.
Yes, have a trombone strapped to my back, gimbal, skateboard, drinking some tea,
Well, I hope I can get back to St. Louis because it's always been fun there, and the food's always good too. So, yeah.
This is true. If we can keep our restaurants open,
yes, sir.
We've had a few that have closed. Like, man, I don't want to speak into existence, none of the other ones, because if my one restaurant go down, I'm like, Lord, I can't get seafood no more like I need to. So,
I hear you, man. I mean, hopefully, for everyone out there, for us and listeners, it's going to be a positive, healthy, prosperous 2021,
For sure. And this has been Backroom Beats with Mark de Clive-Lowe. You tuned into Lamar Harris, aka DJ Nooney, and CJ Conrad. Definitely stay tuned and catch us. Follow us on Instagram, on Twitter, the Anchor channel, and we'll see you guys next time.